Hi, everyone. We finished grading and responding to your first critical reflections. And if you haven't seen our feedback, please check it out and let us know if you have questions. Dr. Stancliffe and I both assessed your papers. We began by reading papers together to make sure that we focused on the same things and provided similar and consistent feedback to everyone. So the critical reflections are a big part of your grade. We tried to provide specific feedback on each of your papers based on the rubric for the assignment, but I also wanted to just spend a few minutes to give you some kind of global feedback. If we were in a classroom, I would do this and just sort of talk about the kinds of things that we saw in the papers. So I hope that this video, along with the specific feedback that you got on your individual paper, will help improve how you write and how you analyze film and fiction, and also help you identify any questions that you might have. So just first of all, I have to say we were really impressed. You came up with so many interesting insights and analysis, and it was really gratifying to see how much course content you've absorbed and thought about and the ways that you kind of put things together. Many of you used Priscilla Wald's concept of the outbreak narrative, but some of you used Cohen and Sontag really well and took their key concepts and related it to films and the readings that we've done so far. So really, for the most part, we were super impressed. So thank you so much for all of your hard work. By and large, most of you responded to the prompt. And always that's the first thing, right? You want to make sure that you respond directly to the prompt. In a couple of instances, it seemed like maybe you forgot to read the prompt. So that's always my suggestion, is not only to read the prompt before you begin, but even when you're kind of in the middle of writing the paper, to go back and look at the prompt. Because I think sometimes what happens is you kind of get going on something and you just kind of jump down that rabbit hole. And sometimes that takes you a little bit too far away from the parameters of the assignment. So even though titles weren't required necessarily, I think that some of you came up with just fabulous titles. Some of them were a little bit boring, like Critical Exploration #1. But a lot of people were very straightforward. Narrative elements of pandemic fiction, narrative conventions of pandemic stories, or even expanding that, narrative conventions of pandemic stories, applying Wald's concept of the outbreak narrative to World War Z and Contagion. And that's really good, right? That really specifies what the paper is going to explore. And then several of you got kind of creative, and I really liked some of the ones like the pandemic blame game, themes of human folly and fiction, walk, don't run, the pathogenic origins of fast zombies, fictional pandemics, illness in the minds of characters, and then super spreaders, social destruction, and the shrinking world, narrative conventions in pandemic stories. So those are all awesome. And I call your attention to titles because a good title really should crystallize and highlight the focus of your papers. Some writers start with titles and then write the paper. Other people will kind of jump in to the paper and then sort of see how the paper is taking shape and come up with a title as you're writing. Some people, I swear, are born with a gene to just like write really great titles. I'm not one of those people. It's always a little bit of a struggle for me, but it is a good sort of moment to step back from your paper and think, okay, what's kind of the center of this? What am I really highlighting? And see if you can pull a title out of that. So I wanted to talk about a couple of other things that really, I think, set papers apart from being good to being really good to being excellent. And that is how people handle incorporating citations into their own writing. So a kind of general rule of thumb is you introduce the quote, so a sentence or so kind of leading into what you're going to quote, and then you quote it. And then you explain the significance of what you've just quoted and you connect it to the overall thesis of the paper or the overall kind of point of that paragraph. And so I think one of the ways to think about this is to you as the writer, you have to kind of hold the hand of your reader, and they may not have just read Priscilla Wald's book, right? So you have to lay a little of the groundwork to explain what you're doing with this quote, then quote it, then delve deeply into the details of what you've just quoted, and then connect it to the point of the paragraph or the thesis. And so here is a good example of effectively incorporating a citation. So as described in Jeffrey Cohen's Monster Culture, monsters are a reflection of the setting they are born in. Quote, as an embodiment of a certain cultural moment, of a time, a feeling, a place, the monster's body quite literally incorporates fear, desire, anxiety, and fantasy. In this sense, our zombies are a manifestation of our cultural fears, and the way we interact with zombies is indicative of how we would like to conquer our fears or how we fear we would be conquered by them. So you see how that quote, incorporation of that quote, does exactly that. Talks about Jeffrey Cohen, identifies the source, gives a little bit about what that source is about, quotes from that source, and then follows up by explaining the significance of it. So here's another one, and I've made some edits to this. And for those of you who are really good writers and need to just notch it up a teeny bit, these are little things, but important things and conventions in academic writing. So you can say in Contagious Cultures, Carriers, and the Outbreak narrative, Priscilla Wald explores narrative conventions, right? That's a great opening line. So you see the change I made there in Priscilla Ward's book. She explores. So I've trimmed it down a little bit. You don't have to say it's a book because your reader already knows, because book titles are italicized. So that's just a simple way to tighten up the writing. And then I won't read all of this, but you can see that it follows the pattern of the last example, includes the quote. This doesn't have the follow-up. I didn't include it all, but what would come after this quote, right, is explaining why this is important, how this takes us to the next point that's going to be made, or clarifies the point of the paragraph. So, because this is an English course, right, and it's an upper division English course, you guys are required to properly format your papers and your works cited page. There are different style manuals that you can follow. This one right here is an example of the MLA style guide. You can use Chicago or APA, whichever you use, though, you have to follow the requirements of that style manual. A lot of you guys just kind of went rogue on your works cited page and kind of made stuff up. So here's an example of what a properly formatted works cited page looks like, right down to the fact that works cited is centered right there at the top of the page. It's double spaced, and then each entry has its own requirements. So if it's a film, if it's a book, if it's an article, if it's an online source, all of those have different requirements. So rather than trying to remember all of that, and I've been writing for many decades and I still go look in my style manual or look it up online to make sure that I'm doing everything properly. So I want to just finish by pointing out several resources that are available to you all. And if you aren't aware, we have a really great writing center on campus and also available via Zoom. So it's the ASU Writing Center. They have student tutors who receive a lot of training for how to help you be a better writer. And it's not a place to just get your paper copy edited. So they really want to delve a little more deeply into your writing process, into how to write a paper really well, to convey your ideas well, to support your claims with evidence. And so if you take a draft to them, they will work through it with you. So I highly recommend that. I also put in the critical reflection assignment a link to the ASU Crash Course series of videos on YouTube. And the person in the picture here is one of our graduates. She just graduated from the English and Communication Studies program at ASU on the West Campus. And she now has a job working for Crash Course. So she moved to Montana, and her series of videos on the writing process are super helpful. No matter where you are in your own writing process, I highly recommend them. And then another resource that I use a lot is OWL Purdue. So OWL stands for Online Writing Lab. And you can just Google it, but that's where I go when I'm like, wait, do I remember how to format a journal article properly? Or how do you format an online source? If you go to OWL Purdue, you can look up any style guide. They have MLA, APA in Chicago, I think. And they'll show you examples, they'll give explanations, but they also have a whole section just on the writing process and on academic writing. So that's something that you could flip through also. And then, of course, you can always visit my office hours or email me. I'm always happy to help people and to answer questions about your writing or about how you did on the assignments. So feel free to do that. I hope this video has given you some insights onto the strengths and weaknesses that we saw in the overall first critical reflection. And if you have questions or comments, please let me know. Thanks so much.